A NAS is a great way to store your data, but as I'm sure a lot of you have heard by now many times, RAID is not a backup. You could set up a second system as a backup NAS on your local network, but then you still technically run the risk of losing both copies of your precious data in the event of something catastrophic. If you really value what's on your NAS, or I guess really any computer, having a remote backup of some kind is the smart way to go. And doing this DIY actually might be a little bit cheaper and significantly easier than you think. In this video, I'm going to throw together some used PC components to assemble a simple budget NAS system. And then I'm going to use something called Tailscale to very easily set that up as a remote backup server at my parents' house. Let's get started. As I already mentioned in the intro, having an offsite backup is a really good way to help protect your data. I currently have a local backup for my main TrueNAS server, but it's totally possible that something catastrophic could happen and wipe out both of those. For example, if someone broke into my house and just decided to steal all the computers they could find, I'd be in trouble. Or I live in Oklahoma, so the chance of a tornado wiping out my house is technically greater than zero. Regardless of what might happen, I still think it's smart for me at least to have a copy of my most valuable data offsite somewhere, and to do that I'm going to use something called Tailscale. Now I do want to mention that Tailscale is the sponsor of this video, but I've used Tailscale for a while for many things, and I was definitely going to use Tailscale for this regardless. And if you're not familiar with Tailscale, it's pretty awesome. You can go check out their website for more details, but essentially it's a VPN service, but it doesn't work like typical VPNs. Instead of having a server with multiple clients that connect in sort of a hub and spoke system, Tailscale is a little bit more of a mesh. You install Tailscale on multiple devices, and then that uses their servers to just negotiate a private VPN tunnel between each device. This makes it really easy to set up secure connections to devices or services you're hosting without having to deal with firewall rules and port forwarding and all of that junk, which is perfect for today's project. If you're still not quite sure how that works, I think it'll be easier to understand once we actually put it into practice. Now, I'm going to be installing TrueNAS on my backup server, but if you want to do something similar, you can pretty much install whatever operating system you want and use whatever protocols for doing backups that you want. You could even run something like a Synology or QNAP NAS appliance, because really, Tailscale can be installed on just about anything, including things you wouldn't think of like Apple TVs. And that actually brings me to another point. Once we get Tailscale set up, we can use it for a lot more than just backing up data to my offsite NAS. Since my parents are being very gracious and letting me store a computer at their house and use their electricity, I thought it was only fair to somehow repay the favor. To do that, I'm going to give them access to my Jellyfin server using Tailscale. Now, it's totally possible to expose something like a Plex or Jellyfin server to the web, but with Tailscale, it's really easy to do it and only give access to people that are in what's called my tailnet. And it's a lot easier because, once again, you don't have to deal with firewall rules or port forwarding. Alright, so that's the plan and the software I'm going to use. What about the hardware? Well, I originally planned on doing this video almost as sort of a challenge where I had like a $100 or $150 budget just to kind of show that you can do this for fairly cheap, but that sort of fell through, and I also just realized I already have a ton of hardware lying around that needs to be put to use. So for the guts of our system, I have this motherboard, which you might recognize from the Home Lab Challenge. Actually, the majority of the hardware in this video comes from the Home Lab Challenge. But this is the motherboard and CPU that I picked up for 20 bucks when I bought a really nasty, gross Lenovo PC, and yes, this is the motherboard that I washed in a sink. But it still works and is nice and clean, and comes with everything we need for our simple server. It has 4 SATA ports, which is exactly what I need for now, and has an i5-6400, which is probably a little bit overkill for a simple TrueNAS box. That $20 system also came with a power supply, although it didn't come with the googly eyes, I had to add those myself. The system didn't come with any RAM, but I'm going to toss in 2 8GB sticks of DDR4 for a total of 16GB. For the case, I'm going to use this Thermaltake, I believe Core V21, which I also got in the Home Lab Challenge. And actually, the seller gave it to me for free, which was really weird, but hey, I'll take it. Honestly, this case isn't very practical as it's kind of bulky and there's a lot of wasted space, but I think that actually might work out in the long run. It comes with 2 drive bays, which is perfect for today's build, and I think if I ever want to add more drives down the road, I could probably 3D print some brackets to fit inside to add some more hard drive cages. Now, speaking of hard drives, I'm going to use these 2 4TB used HDSD drives that I picked up also in the Home Lab Challenge. Now, 4 TB isn't a ton of space, at least compared to my current TrueNAS box, but it should give me enough space to back up at least my most important files like final video renders, important documents, and footage for my current projects. And finally, for the boot drive, I'm actually going to be using two 128GB SSDs set up in a mirror. That way, if for some reason one of these dies, the system can keep running until I have time to drive over to my parents' house and fix it. And that's pretty much it. We don't need any more PCIe cards or anything for faster networking because we're going to be limited to gigabit. So that's all the hardware. Let's go get it assembled. Getting everything assembled was fairly easy. The only real issue I ran into was that the case didn't have the drive mounts for the 2.5-inch SSDs, so I just kind of chucked those as well as a lot of the cables in the bottom of the case. It doesn't look great, but it's all really easy to access still, and honestly the next person to see any of this is probably going to be me whenever I decide to upgrade it. The only other very minor issues I ran into are that with this motherboard, the headers for the front panel audio and front panel USB 3 ports are weird proprietary connectors, so I wasn't able to hook those up. But everything else worked great, and within a few minutes of getting it all put together, I had it booted up and ready for TrueNAS. Off camera, I installed TrueNAS Scale onto the two SSDs, created a pool with the two 4TB hard drives, and did very basic things like set up the network, for example. So now we can see I'm in the TrueNAS dashboard, and everything looks good. We have our 16 gigs of RAM, we have our backup pool with a little bit less than 4 terabytes of usable space, and we should be ready to go ahead and install Tailscale. Now, normally when using Linux, installing Tailscale is really simple. You just add some repositories and then install it and spin it up. But with TrueNAS, it's a little bit different because we're going to install it as an app. And I will mention here that Tom Lawrence over at Lawrence Systems has some really good videos on how to set this up and configure it the way that I'm about to. So I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quick, but if you want more info on TrueNAS and Tailscale specifically, go check those videos out. So for now, in the Applications tab, we can go to Discover Apps, type in Tailscale. So that was weird. Search didn't work for some reason, but we can find Tailscale here. And I do need to set up my pool first, I guess. Okay, now that I have my dataset set up to install apps, we can go ahead and install Tailscale. We'll just leave the name as Tailscale, version the same. Now for Auth-key, we're actually going to need to log into our Tailscale account. And I have that pulled up here in a different browser window. And what we need to do is go up to Settings, and then Keys, and then under Auth keys, we're going to generate a new auth key. And then we're just going to copy this guy, hop back over into our config, and paste it. And then for our host name, I'm actually going to change this from TrueNAS Scale to TrueNAS Offsite. And then it's really important here to uncheck this user space, at least if you're using this how I'm planning to use it. And then down here under host network, we want to check that. You also could advertise as an exit node if you want to use this NAS as essentially like a VPN server. If you wanted to funnel your traffic through that server out to the internet, you could set this up as an exit node. I'm not going to worry about that just yet. And then everything else should be fine. I'm going to limit this to, we'll do 4, why not? Now, while this is trying to spin up, it's going to request approval from Tailscale, or from our Tailscale account to join our Tailnet. So we need to hop back over to our Tailscale dashboard and make sure and approve this machine. And then back in TrueNAS, we should be able to just wait until this finishes deploying. All right, and it seems like it's running, and I'm curious, over here in the Network tab, the interface for Tailscale didn't pop up, and it did this with my TrueNAS server as well. But if we hop down into the shell, for example, and type in IPA, we can see that we do have this Tailscale interface. And what that also means is if I want to, for example, hop on my other TrueNAS server, which is back in my little network closet, I can SSH into that, and we could ping this. So on my local network, the backup server we just made is at this IP address here, so I can ping that no problems. But I can also now ping that over my Tailnet. Just sort of for a quick refresher, you can see I have this TrueNAS offsite, but I also have TrueNAS Scale, which is my main TrueNAS server. If I copy this IP address here, and I'll hop back in and type in ping, and then paste that IP address, We can also see we're pinging this just fine. There's a little bit more latency because we're now tunneling this through a VPN, but these machines can talk through Tailscale, and theoretically that should work whether this NAS is on my local network, at my parents' house a few miles away, or completely across the world. And that's one of the really cool things about Tailscale is this is really quick and easy to set up. So now we have Tailscale up and running. Let's actually use that to run a backup. So I'm over here this is my local NAS, and this is the offsite or soon to be offsite NAS. And so over on the local NAS, I'm going to set up a ZFS replication task. So for source location, we're going to go on this system, and I'm actually going to grab just this archive data set here, which is pretty small. It's just a copy of all of the finals of some of my older videos and some footage that I'd like to hang on to, but no huge bulky projects or anything. And then for destination location, we're going to say on a different system. And I off camera already set up this backup offsite, which is just an SSH connection over the tailnet. And then it just has this backup pool. And I'm going to select, it's been a while, but I think I just select this backup pool. So we'll leave that as is. We're going to leave everything else the same. This is for the archive. So honestly, we can run this like weekly, Sundays at midnight. Why not? Hit save. Pay no attention to this failed backup here. Don't worry about that. Let's go ahead and run this. Oh no, error. Oh yeah, okay, I did that wrong. That's just me being silly. So easy peasy, we can go in here and add a data set within backup pool, and we'll call this archive. And let's edit this. We'll switch that to archive. Let's try running this again. Okay, so it actually seems to be working, which is pretty cool. While that's running, let's talk about something else I did off camera, which is install this virtual machine here on the soon-to-be offsite NAS called Jellyfin. And this is just a Debian virtual machine. And the primary reason I have this is to use it as a reverse proxy, because earlier I mentioned that I wanted my parents to be able to use Jellyfin, but the problem is they're using Fire Sticks, which is one of the few devices you can't actually just directly install Tailscale on. So if they did have an Apple TV, I could install Tailscale, and then when I set up Jellyfin, I could just type in either the IP on my tailnet for my Jellyfin server or what's called a magic DNS name. So I could just type in Jellyfin and it would tunnel that to my Jellyfin server. But they don't have Apple TVs, so that's going to be tricky. So instead, I'm going to run this virtual machine on their network. And I called it Jellyscale because it's going to be Jelly Tailscale. You can figure it out. But essentially, this is going to be running Tailscale, which I actually installed that earlier. So I can type in Tailscale IP, for example, and get this IP on my tailnet. And it's also running something called Nginx, which is a reverse proxy. And the idea here is that I can set up a Jellyfin client, like their Fire Stick, to try to access this virtual machine's local IP address. When that happens, Nginx will reverse proxy that using Tailscale to connect back to my Jellyfin server. So if we look back at my machines again, you can see one of them is called Jellyfin, and that's just running directly on my server, which is running Jellyfin. It's an LXC container. And so I can actually go here in my Jellyscale VM and type in, for example, ping, and just literally type in Jellyfin, and that will actually resolve and work, which is pretty cool. And that should work even when this NAS is over at my parents' house. So the idea, once again, is my parents' Fire Stick, which is trying to run Jellyfin or whatever else, would connect to this, and then a reverse proxy would proxy that back to this just Jellyfin over Tailscale. Now for Nginx, it was a little bit tricky. Jellyfin does have docs that you can reference, and I copy-pasted one of their configs, and it took a little bit of trial and error, and I'll show you that really quick. If we go to sudo nano etc nginx confd jellyfin, all that, we can get to this nginx configuration file here. And for the most part, the copy and paste worked. What I found was an issue was when I tried to use this variable here. Oh, yeah, here it is. When I tried to use this variable here, which was originally not commented out, it says set Jellyfin. And I just typed in Jellyfin, which is the domain name of my Jellyfin server when we're using Magic DNS from Tailscale. But that didn't work for some reason. And I eventually found that if I just got rid of this entirely, and then down here, instead of using $Jellyfin to use that variable value, I just manually typed in that Jellyfin to each of these. And as long as Nginx is running, which it should be, I can actually go up here to not my Jellyfin server. I can go to, I'll eventually have to set this up as like a static IP so they can always access it. But for right now, on my local network, it's at 196.1 or 192.168.10.250. And if I hit that, that's actually proxying me back to my Jellyfin server. So I'm able to access my, there's some funny stuff on here. As of right now, I'm able to access this Jellyfin server from a different computer. And this will make more sense once we actually get this off of my local network. It'll be a lot more impressive then. But it's pretty cool. Once this is set up on my parents' network, they'll be able to set up all of their clients to connect to this virtual machine, which will just reverse proxy back to my Jellyfin server, giving them access to our Jellyfin library, which is pretty cool and hopefully makes having to keep this server at their house a little bit more worth it. And then back in TrueNAS, it seems like this replication task is running as expected with no hiccups or errors. So I'm going to let this run overnight, and then tomorrow morning, we're going to load this system up and take it over to my parents' house. And hopefully, because this is just connecting via DHCP, I'll literally be able to walk in, plug the system in, plug it into their router, and leave. And then I should be able to come back home and connect to it and do everything I need to do from at home, because Tailscale, it's great. All right, I'm going to go to bed. I'll see you back tomorrow morning. All right, guys, it's the next morning. I've got the server loaded up here in the car with an Ethernet cable and a power cord, because that's really all we should need. I should be able to just drive over to my parents' house, plug this thing in, turn it on, and walk out the door, because I could come back here and with Tailscale doing its magic, I could just connect to it without any issues. I'm probably going to double check things before I do leave, just so I don't have to drive back if anything went wrong. But it should be fairly simple, so I'm going to get going. All right, so I'm at my parents' house in their sort of spare bedroom, and we're going to put the server down in this corner because right up here is the modem router that we're going to hook it up to. I think it'll make the most sense to kind of tuck it right around there, all the way up against the corner once I get it plugged in. That way this closet door can still open. And like I mentioned before, all we should have to plug in is the network connection and the power supply. Untangle this massive mess I just made, and then really awkwardly plug this into the back of their router. And now we should be good to just turn it on. All right, so I said it was going to be just as easy as turning the server on, driving back home, and that would be the end of the story. But it wasn't quite that simple, but it wasn't Tailscale's fault. When I booted the server up, the Tailscale application just would not deploy for some reason, and I could not figure it out for the life of me. I eventually sorted it out, and it had to do with some Kubernetes networking that's not really anything to do with Tailscale. It's just TrueNAS uses Kubernetes for their apps, and it's kind of a mess sometimes and kind of a pain, and I'm not really a fan. As you can actually see, this is my personal TrueNAS box here at my house, and the only application I'm running is this Tailscale container. So typically when I run TrueNAS, I like to just run TrueNAS because sometimes I run into weird bugs like this. Now the interesting thing was that I was actually able to troubleshoot all of this from my house because the virtual machine on our other TrueNAS box, so this is the Offsite TrueNAS box, this Jellyfin VM spun up just fine and Tailscale worked. So I'm accessing the server not from the Tailscale IP or Tailscale domain. I'm accessing this from this 192.168.1.81 IP address, which is actually on my parents' local subnet because I set up this Jellyfin VM as what's called a subnet router. And this basically just lets me use this like a typical VPN where I can access their local network using Tailscale. So I'm actually able to access this TrueNAS UI either from here using like their subnet, or I can just type in right now, the URL is just T because I got tired of when I was troubleshooting typing in TrueNAS scale offsite a bunch of times. So it's just T. So yeah, I can just go to T/, and I'm at my TrueNAS dashboard for my offsite server, which is pretty cool. But like I said, I did eventually get this Tailscale app running, and then over on my main TrueNAS box, I was able to go to this replication task and run it, and you can see that this runs without any issues. And also because, like I said, that Jellyfin VM spun up without any issues, I can go to 192.168.1, which is not my subnet, it's my parent's subnet, .82, and we can access my Jellyfin server from their local network, which is pretty cool. And this does work on their TVs as well. So it was a little bit rocky, but we got there, and honestly, Tailscale kind of saved the day by letting me access that UI remotely because the VM still works, so I could use the subnet router and access it like that, even though Tailscale wasn't working directly on the offsite TrueNAS box. So even with all of the quirks, I hope this goes to show that you can pretty easily set up a remote backup on your parents' network or on a friend's network without too much trouble using Tailscale. And I was able to do it with some pretty cheap hardware. Obviously, I got some good deals and I literally got a case for free, but I think I spent $50 or so between the motherboard and the SSDs, and then around $80 or $90 on the two 4TB drives. So between like $100, $150, I was able to put together a decent system that can operate as a backup for my most important files. And like I mentioned earlier, if I want to expand, I can probably 3D print some brackets to shove some more hard drives in there and have some more storage for even more files. And that pretty much wraps this one up. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want to see more content like this, maybe make sure you're subscribed because I have some cool videos planned for some NAS build stuff and upgrading my NAS and my backup NAS, and who knows, maybe even upgrading this offsite NAS. Once again, I want to thank Tailscale for sponsoring this video. I love Tailscale, and I would have used it whether they were sponsoring the video or not, but definitely check it out if you haven't checked it out before. That pretty much wraps it up for this one though, so as always, thank you guys so much for watching, stay curious, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.